Thank you very much, Beth. It's nice to see so many friends here and to have a chance to talk about some of my recent thinking and research. I actually won't be talking a lot about the current project tonight, but I do want to mention that recently I've been working with Dr. Lili Lai of the Peking University Medical Humanities Institute on the emergence of minority nationality medicines in China, which is quite a big movement, which may escape your notice if you spend all your time in Beijing, but there's a lot going on out there in minority areas in the development of new forms of systematic traditional medicine. So I'll talk a little bit about that, but first I have a few thoughts about alternative medicine, integrating medicine, and Chinese experience. So I'm going to start by explaining my title a little bit, focusing on some of the concepts that this title evokes. One word in this title is medicine itself. That should be pretty self-evident, but I want to make sure you understand that for me this word doesn't just refer to modern biomedicine or what has been called Western medicine in China. It refers to almost any kind of healing or any kind of practice which addresses illness and the body. In China, we've long contrasted Chinese medicine and Western medicine. Western medicine, or biomedicine, is that form of medicine that has about 200 years of history. It has an ever more convincing foundation in bioscience, and it's technologically complex, especially in the domains of diagnostic technologies, biochemical drugs, and surgical techniques. Chinese medicine and other forms of traditional medicine are more difficult to characterize as a system of medicine, but many people think of traditional Chinese medicine, or what I will call TCM most of the time, as grounded in a historically very deep clinical literature and as working from the experience of generations of good doctors. So let me go to talk for a moment about the term integrating or integration. Why do people talk about integrating alternative medicines? That might not be entirely clear here in China. I recently attended a conference in South Korea. Vivian Lowe was there also. For researchers who do historical and social research on various forms of traditional medicine in Asia. The conference was devoted to the theme, Beyond Integration. What did the organizers mean by integration, and what do I mean by integration? Both of us were referring to integration of something called alternative medicine into a public health system. In the modern situation of human health, nation-states feel compelled to foster the life of the citizens through the ethical provision of medical care. Socialist governments in particular have promised that the nation led by the party will provide for the needs of every individual. These imperatives have not only been important for places like Russia, China, and Cuba, but also for the European social democracies and all the nations that have publicly funded national health systems. Integration is an issue in the U.S., even though so much of the public health and healthcare services system there in the United States is private and receives relatively little state support. In a privatized system like that in the United States, state regulation replaces state support. The Department of Health and Human Services, the Food and Drug Administration, the Justice Department, all concern themselves with protecting the people from bad or dangerous medicine through legal regulation. For a long time, in the latter half of the 20th century, this regulatory function rejected the claims of all non-biomedical or traditional forms of practice. In other words, it was a policy to treat biomedical services as the only legal and safe form of health care, and to build public health on biomedicine alone. The rules governing health insurance have been crucial influences in maintaining this powerful position for biomedicine. There's a lot more I could say about these particular issues in American history, but I'm not going to spend too much time on the historical issues. I want to return to the question of what is alternative medicine. In the 1990s and since then, there's been a vigorous movement in the US and Europe to develop and legalize complementary and alternative medicine, which is often abbreviated CAM. Chinese medicine, and especially acupuncture, has been the most successful in claiming official recognition. Now, in many states, and with the approval of the American Medical Association, with the reluctant approval of the American Medical Association, acupuncture can be practiced legally and paid for with health insurance if it is practiced by a biomedical doctor. Some states even allow practitioners trained mainly in Chinese medicine to legally practice acupuncture. Various kinds of herbal medicine, techniques like therapeutic yoga and massage, and psychological or religious treatment of bodily disorders have also been seeking recognition by regulatory agencies and by insurance companies, with varying degrees of success in various states. This is all done state by state in the United States. Still, the Department of Health and Human Services and the National Institutes of Health are committed to this complementary and alternative medicine category. In other words, everything that is not biomedicine must be classified as a supplement, an extra, something outside the legal system. But in order to understand this term, complementary and alternative medicine, we have to stop for a moment and distinguish between complementary and alternative. Under these particular conditions in the United States, medical services that can be considered complementary are preferred by policymakers. In some cases, biomedical people will acknowledge that patients want to supplement their biomedical treatment with some folk practice that might make them more comfortable. If dangerous drug interactions, this is what we often hear about, dangerous drug interactions, if these problems can be avoided, this kind of so-called complementary health care is considered okay by many medical people in the U.S. But non-Western medicine, when treated as an alternative, remains a problem. Doctors and government agencies worry that patients with acute needs for biomedical services, needing surgery or chemotherapy, for example, will develop some kind of commitment to a fake form of medicine that cannot help them. They might avoid seeking proper biomedical care and will only get sicker as a result. One view I often encounter when talking to medical people is that sick people should just listen to their biomedical doctor and avoid playing around with charlatans or fake doctors unless their doctor says it's okay. This complementary and alternative medicine category raises complex social and political issues, which I don't want to oversimplify. But even with this rather loose account I've just given you, you can see that integration of medical practices like acupuncture and herbal medicine into a heavily regulated national public health system is a concern. Traditional medicines are not much integrated in the United States or in most of Europe. So integration is a concern especially for those who have learned some form of complementary and alternative medicine. Many such practitioners naturally seek official recognition and, of course, health insurance payments. So this evening I want to focus on the problem of integration in the Chinese context. Here in China, the idea of complementary and alternative medicine is not so salient as it is in the United States, partly because of the history of medical pluralism in China. What does medical pluralism mean? It means that a public health landscape offers a number of kinds of medicine or approaches to healing. In a plural medical field, more than one tradition of medicine can practice legally, and patients can move between and among systems of medicine as they seek appropriate care. Many countries in the world are medically plural. Prime examples of pluralistic medical systems are found in India and China, though many countries in the developing world are beginning to support the development of indigenous traditional medicines, and even the World Health Organization has issued some proclamations in support of traditional medical integration. Most of you know something, at least, about China's history of medical pluralism, so I don't need to rehearse it at length. But just quickly mentioning a couple of things. Biomedical or Western medical services began to develop in China from the late 19th century, but really only achieved a national reach after several decades of development were supported by the government of the People's Republic of China. The party's program of taking medical expertise to the countryside was very important, in my view, in providing basic biomedical primary care to most of the Chinese people, partly through the Barefoot Doctor program. From the 1950s forward, traditional Chinese medicine developed alongside the expansion of biomedical services, although always on a much smaller scale. Still, traditional Chinese medicine, as it was established, became something other than biomedicine. Its leaders insisted on sustaining what they saw as traditional knowledge. Traditional techniques like acupuncture and moxibustion, traditional herbal medicines and formulary. Especially beginning in the 1980s, theorists and policymakers in the world of TCM developed many ways of explaining the difference of TCM from biomedicine and exploring the specificity of TCM. Yet in practice, in the PRC period, TCM was always integrated with Western medicine. The Chinese public health system has been committed to providing primary care, up until recently, that is, and it has supported the establishment of Euro-American style hospitals, clinics, and health stations. In TCM institutions, the professions of physician, nurse, and medical administrators have been in place since at least the 1950s. Case records in TCM hospitals have been written and managed on an American model. Instruments are sterilized. People wear white coats. Acute appendicitis cases are sent to a surgeon. TCM medical schools have taught basic science and biomedical specialties, along with the classical literature in acupuncture and herbal medicine for a very long time now. A great many Western medicine-trained doctors have contributed to the development of TCM as well, making it an effective, modern, and even scientific form of health services delivery. TCM doctors are able to read x-rays, diagnose according to Western medicine criteria, and figure out what kinds of services are most appropriate for the sick people who come to see them. Also important, the general population maintains a pretty clear idea of what TCM is good for and what Western medicine is good for. Not very many people exclusively prefer one or the other system. Rather, sick people and their families reserve an ability to choose what kind of services they think will best serve their needs. I'm going to return to this situation in a minute. But I want to make one more historical point. Structurally, China's national healthcare system has begun to look a lot more like the healthcare system in the United States. More and more health services institutions, hospitals, clinics, even schools here in China are run as private businesses, just as they are in the United States. County and township hospitals receive only a small proportion of their funding from the state. Now they must recover their costs from the various insurance schemes in place and from patients themselves. Hospitals and doctors work in a market setting, and increasingly they compete for patients. Medical services become a kind of product that must be advertised, sold, chosen by customers. This is an important change from the state-supported systems of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s in China. At that time, the village health station and the township health department and hospital were the entry points to a tiered system, emphasizing simple and basic primary care, mostly of a Western medicine sort. It's possible to see that the place of Western medicine and TCM as complementary or alternative to each other in a marketized medical field would have to change. Policymakers and hospital directors now have to ask themselves, what do patients want? And what will insurance companies pay for? In other words, if patients are the drivers of patterns of healthcare utilization in an increasingly privatized public health system, they function like customers. Their desires and assessments must be addressed by service providers. Privately funded, market-oriented hospitals, clinics, and practitioners seek to understand the patient and his or her preferences. Providers try to work their way into market niches. To do so, they need to understand the people who will be their customers. In this complex situation, there are new diversities appearing. Here I want to turn to the subject of Lili Lai's and my recent research, the development of minority nationality medicines in China. TCM is not the only complementary or alternative kind of medicine available in China now. China is becoming perhaps the most plural medical landscape in the world, especially if we only count officially recognized kinds of medicine. There's a rather brief background to the emergence of minority nationality medicines. Although some people mention an ethnicity policy issued in the 1950s by the Communist Party, really the first significant policy moves about minority nationality medicine and culture were in 1982, when there was a turn to ethnic and medical diversity in national policy. The 55 recognized minority nationalities of China were at that point allowed to develop certain local projects which were seen as ethnically specific or specific to each nationality. And folk or traditional medicine was included in this policy. So between 1982 and now, there has been a very rapid and rich development of several kinds of minority nationality medicine, with the most complex and most successful and large-scale initiatives being Tibetan, Uyghur, and Mongolian forms of medicine. But as of the early 1980s, some other large and influential groups, such as the Zhuang or the Dai, began to do research and compile teaching materials and histories. Later, these groups have established teaching institutions, clinics, and nowadays, some of the smaller groups even have hospitals and medical schools. Around the 2004, 2005, many other groups began to use national funding from the federal government here in Beijing to research and develop their own nationality medicine, aiming eventually to open hospitals, training centers, and to stage licensing exams to regulate practice. Lili and I are working with 7 groups. Only a couple of them are running examinations yet. There are only a couple of them that have hospitals. But everyone aspires to develop these kinds of modern institutions. Now I have some slides that I hope will give you just a quick glimpse of some of the aspects of minority nationality medicine that are becoming the centers of our own interest. First, I wanted to show you some of the institutions. This is a Yao hospital in Tongmu town, near Jinshou county town in Guangxi. This is the some of the doctors at the entrance to the Yao hospital, each wearing his or her own specific hat for the specific subgroup of Yao people to which they belong. This is the large new Zhuang hospital in Nanning, Guangxi. This is, as you can see, Miao and Tujia Clinic for rheumatic diseases in Hunan. This is the pharmacy, I think, in that Zhuang hospital I just showed you. So it's got Chinese medicine on one side and Minzu nationality medicine on the other side. This is a thriving private clinic in near Jinshou that it has recently been, the building has recently been built, but the practice of this senior doctor has been formidable in the area for a long time. This is a research center for Zhuang and Yao medicine at the, the Guangxi Zhengyao Daxue, the Guangxi College, University of Chinese Medicine. This is a clinic run by that Yao hospital with which I began the slides in the county town. Also has a few hospital beds. And this is the very spiffy and spacious and clean and tidy clinic of a very entrepreneurial Tujia doctor who is making a name for himself as a treater of bones and injuries. Another center, so that's the kind of the examples of the institutional interests that we've developed and which we will continue to think about in the world of emergent minority nationality medicines. But we have also long been impressed with the way in which plants are central to the world of minority nationality medicines. And everyone seems to presume that the heart of the local specificity of their local minority medicine is the plants themselves, which are collected locally, processed locally, and usually sold locally. And there are many plants that are so specific to the area that they haven't appeared in the national pharmacopoeia books. And people, the people we spend time with when we're doing research in these areas are all fascinated by plants and always seeking to learn about new varieties or new kinds of medicinal plants that they didn't know about before. This is a little research center devoted to plants in the Yao Hospital with Dr. Pan, now retired, showing us his mini museum exhibit, which includes a gathering basket for going up into the mountains and gathering medicines. I included this so you can see that this is a kind of that these kinds of medicines are almost always announced as being zuchuan, family transmitted. This is a third-generation doctor selling special his or her family's. I can't remember if it was a him or a her. I think it was a him. His family's remedies for all these illnesses that are listed here, and they're very xiao, and ling. They're very effective, and but they belong to the family, and they benefit. They're some of the aura of these drugs comes from the fact that they've been tested by this one family for 3 generations. So this group of slides is meant to show you some of the kind of embodied human aspect of medicine, medical expertise, and medical knowledge. This is a Yao herbalist who is in her little street stall where she sells herbs. She's treating a child with a bloodletting technique. This is an Achang doctor in Yunnan, treating his son's injured wrist with one of his special herbal plasters. This is a Tujia doctor who is quite the showman himself in many ways, but we were happy to have a chance to catch him doing mundane clinical work in his own living room with a very loyal patient who comes back often for treatment of, as I recall, coronary heart disease. This is a Lisu doctor. We didn't find it, and one of our wonderful researchers, Yang Yuqi, with him, interviewing him and taking notes. This Lisu doctor didn't have much Putonghua, so his son in the pink shirt is translating for him. But he was very Zuchuanda. He had his grandfather was teaching him by way of dreams how to treat patients with particularly difficult diseases. This is another Achang doctor dealing not very satisfactorily, I must say, with my very bad feet. His advice was, he was bored by my feet, and his advice was very routine Chinese medicine: improve your circulation and all will be well. Okay, so I want to go back to integration. how are these alternative or complementary medicines being integrated into a national healthcare system here, if they are being integrated? First, there's an institutional integration which is undeniable. Just like traditional Chinese medicine, and using the traditional Chinese medicine model, the institutions with the white coats, the sterilized instruments, the formal case records, the textbooks, the training sessions, the licensing exams are all there for groups like the Zhuang and the Dai. And other smaller groups are aspiring to achieve these kinds of regularization, routinization, and institutionalization. Meanwhile, this formal institutionalization and the regulation that goes with it, the legal regulation that goes with it in China, is sending many kinds of healers further to the edges of all systems, driving them underground. But patients still seek them out in their homes. A second kind of integration, like both traditional Chinese medicine and Western medicine in China, as in other countries, nationality medicines are becoming commodified offerings in a complex medical market. The consumer of medical services faces an array of choices, many of them eligible for insurance reimbursement, which is often pretty paltry, and many of them not. A third mode of integration, patients and their families tend to be activists about medical care. They take personal responsibility for finding the right therapy and go through a lot of trial and error, but that means they have to kind of understand the field of options in their area or in China in general. Patients, in my experience in China, do not patiently wait for a slow therapy to work. They don't have loyalty to doctors. They don't go back and keep trying with the same doctor if things are not very satisfactory. If they're not quickly satisfied, they go elsewhere. There's a lot of shopping for therapies here in China. That's been true of traditional Chinese medicine and Western medicine, just as it is for minority medicines. Another aspect of integration, the kinds of medicines that turn up at the door of a minority nationality healer, and quite often of a Chinese medical healer, are the yinan zabing, the difficult and complex illnesses, chronic diseases, things that remain symptomatic and uncomfortable despite everything that biomedicine can do to try to cure them. The very existence of chronic disease and mysterious diseases, difficult and complex diseases, which has not been not a problem that has ever been or will ever be totally resolved by any one medical system, is the condition that leads people to continue to seek out alternative forms of medicine. There are all kinds of examples of this. The management of side effects with cancer chemotherapy, for example, is very often taken on by alternative medicines or traditional medicines. Digestive disorders, chronic irritable bowel syndrome, for example, well treated by many of these medicines. Treatment of all kinds of pain, migraines, arthritis. There are some special diseases that are especially well handled by minority nationality medicines in the South, where we've been working. There's a syndrome called fear in children, which is well treated by certain kinds of treatments. We saw an infant being treated with Tuina for this kind of disorder. Children sometimes are egon. They get colds all the time, a long-term kind of disorder that really needs management, but biomedical doctors don't know what to do about it. There are quite a few herbalists and other kinds of nationality healers have methods for this sort of thing. Treatment of other stubborn conditions like depression, which is, of course, thought of in different terms in a different medical system. The bottom line is patients believe they know what kind of medicine is good for managing what kind of discomforts. And they share this information far beyond the clinic. They tell each other what they've had good experience with. I'm going to return to that in a moment, too. A fifth factor in integration is people's orientations toward the doctor-patient relationship, which is much fetishized in medical sociology in the United States. But it has a special character here in China, I think. I got some insight on this, the background or the history of problems that have been articulated in doctor-patient relationships in China from a presentation at the Korea meeting by Angelica Messner, who presented a text from the 17th century written by someone relatively little known named Xiao Jing. Xiao Jing presented a detailed procedure by which a patient could assess the skills of his doctor. Patients were advised in this text to closely observe their doctor's work, to tell him nothing in advance while waiting for him to take the pulse and examine the tongue, evaluating whether the doctor's independent analysis of the symptoms accorded with their own experience, and slowly building up a rational evaluation of the doctor before paying him anything or agreeing to follow his advice. Angelica Messner argued that the linchpin of this advice was the question of trust. The patient is not expected to trust the doctor in advance just because he's the doctor. And if the patient does the work of observing the doctor, paying close attention, evaluating his activities, then he might be able to achieve a certain amount of trust in the doctor. I think trust might be a slightly misleading word. I think it's more about achieve the conviction that this doctor might be the right one for you. Now, here's what I mainly want to argue. The main site at which any and all medical services are actually integrated is the body and experience of the patient. We could study the particular ways in which kinds of healing resources are gathered together in each body, in each case, through collecting illness narratives. This is something medical anthropologists do a lot. And they do it by asking questions like, when you got sick, what did you do? What did you do first? Were you disappointed with that? Why were you disappointed with this or that doctor? How did certain medicines or techniques address your symptoms or fail to address them? After you gave up on chemical drugs or acupuncture, what did you do then? And so forth, following people through the long stories of year after year trying to manage chronic illness discomforts. Such illness narratives are sometimes spoken of as quests for therapy, searches for healing that involve a long series of decisions and choices, stories that are sometimes full of disappointments, but also sometimes including discoveries of good advice, good medicines, and good doctors. And speaking of good advice and trust in the doctor, in a previous research project that Zhang Qicheng and I conducted here in Beijing, we often asked people whose health advice they most trusted. Did they trust their doctor, health department posters, TV medical shows, radio lectures, the newspaper? Again and again, Beijingers told us they most relied on the advice of their friends and family members who had direct experience of illness and of some form of healing. The authority of science or even of the Chinese medical literature with all its sage teachers was nowhere to be heard. Rather, people expected to learn from embodied experience. I guess they could come to trust a physician precisely because he had had a lot of direct experience of illness, but they would not trust him because he was trained at the best medical school. In this assessment of therapies that strongly privileges experience, nationality medicine healers with their long years of informal practice may have a great advantage over doctors working within formal institutions. Finally, from the point of view of health services policy and public health, which is the point of view I'm kind of adopting tonight, I'm beginning to conclude that integration of various traditional medicines can only be partly successful at the institutional level. Where integration is successful, it seems, is in the body and life of those who are ill and need medical care. But all these forms of medicine are unified differently in every personal story, in every family, in every group of gossiping friends. Disintegration, or continuous diversification and even competition of systems seems to be more the rule for contemporary national healthcare landscapes than any form of systematic integration. What must be taken more seriously and understood better is the integration that takes place in a million different ways at the level of the sick person's body, in her desires, in her experience, in his discriminations, and in his choices. So I'll stop there.
Do we have a first question?
Jay?
Thank you so much for the talk, Judy. One of the questions I had was the second point you raised, when you said that one of the driving forces in integration is consumer choice, to a certain degree. Now, when you have something like consumer choice, you've obviously got something like a sort of commodity form, and like between something like Western medicine, Chinese traditional medicine, and sort of minority medicine, what seems to be then the sort of mediating commodity form that's supposed to generate value?
The mediating commodity form. The abstract commodity form doesn't mediate well enough?
Any commodity form. Is it the healed patient, the outcome of the sort of diagnosis, or what kind of thing is the thing that has value between these three, in a sense, if that is the driving force?
I'm not sure I said that this is the driving force. It's an issue. The commodification is an issue in the process of integration. But I'm not sure why all these different kinds need to have a common commodity form. But certainly therapy and effectiveness, effective treatment of some kind. I think that whether it's a drug, whether it's acupuncture, whether it's massage, whether it's gua sha, whatever it is, that those things don't have to be the same, but some sense of an experienced change after a therapeutic encounter or with a therapeutic encounter is what I think people think that they're seeking and what doctors think they're trying to deliver. But the problem is that experience is tricky for medicine. You know, you successfully treat high blood pressure, the experience of the patient doesn't change. So that it's some of these things are hard to commodify, and yet in hospital policy and health department policy, there's a sense that we have to make sure our product is going to be the product chosen by consumers, and that product is effective therapies, I guess. Is that what you meant?
That's kind of what I meant.
Kind of. Okay.
Hi, Judith. Thanks so much for the talk. And as you have addressed nowadays that the patients kind of are not patient with their doctors,
right,
especially in China.
Right.
Did you have any research on like the previous years? For example, before the new China founded, were the relationship more like loyal between the patients and then? Not
so much loyalty as a relative lack of flexibility. You know, when there was if there ever was here, I'm not sure, I wasn't here, but if before 1980 there was a unified tiered medical system in which people were semi-required to go either to their village health station or to the township hospital seeking care, and from there be referred upward through the system for what might be needed. If that was the only form of service delivery at the time, then people might have felt, well, there's no way for me to shop for this. You know, I'm not satisfied with having this as the only option, but not too much else I can do. But of course, I'm sure, and I think Lily and I are both sure, that during the whole 20th century, there were folk practices quietly going on all the time, folk herbal medicine in particular. And that would have been an important resource for people because they also didn't have to pay for that kind of service. They might engage in some kind of barter. So I think that there was always a certain amount of consumer activism or patient activism in seeking care. But there's a lot more now.
A follow-up question is, do you think there's differences like in terms of minority culture medicine patients and then Chinese medicine patients and then Western medicine patients, like, or their patient levels or their royalty levels towards their doctors?
No. I think that the nationality medicine movement would like to think that they can recruit more loyalty from patients because they're the same nationality, or they're local doctors, or they participate in the magic of the minority nationality, you know, the magical Yao healer up in the mountains, you know, that there may be some feeling that these doctors, unlike your heavily institutionalized traditional Chinese medicine doctors and Western medicine doctors, will have more pull. You know, the patients will want more to work with them. I'm not sure that's the case. And a lot of medical anthropology over the last 40 years has been trying to track patient loyalty and patient choices, whether they act on loyalty or on some kind of cultural commonality, you know, in choosing a doctor or choosing a therapy. And they haven't found a lot of that kind of loyalty anywhere in the world.
Hi, Judy. I have two related questions. One, to what extent do you see these local institutions aspiring to broaden their consumer base to expand beyond the region of their origin? And another related one is, in that project or in their own local institutions, do they position themselves as a niche alternative, or do they want to become comprehensive medical service providers, hybrid forms maybe like Chinese medicine has become?
A lot of advertising in various forms in different places. I mean, a lot of the groups we're working with are not at the point where they can claim any national prestige and draw patients from all over, although there are patients that come from rather far away to the Yao Hospital and the Zhuang Hospital. And Tibetan medical activists have, as you know, built the Tibetan Medicine Hospital here in Beijing. Maybe Tibetan medicine is kind of a model out there as an ideal model for what could happen to a nationality medicine, which would to become national with all its specificity and all its cultural particularity. And your second question was, remind me.
The way, for instance, Chinese medicine.
Oh, claiming to be a comprehensive medicine. Right. I think that in this case, the Chinese medicine model is a good model, where Chinese medical hospitals very seldom have a surgical suite. They may have one that's locked up. We've been in one hospital, one minority nationality medicine that has a surgical suite that says surgical suite on the locked steel door, and no one ever goes in there. But Chinese medicine has not tried to be a comprehensive medicine, although it has expanded its specialties in many, many directions which are not traditional. Nevertheless, it's still, I think, people in the world of trying to develop Chinese medicine are content to be complementary to biomedicine. And I would expect that the minority medicines, as they develop, would adopt more or less the same strategy.
Thank you for your vivid speech. And I just made my first dive with the help of your student, Lai Li. And I just want to know, as an anthropologist, what's the difference of your works between the doctors or researchers who are focused on the traditional Chinese medicine? I think your works some kind of similar, but I think there must be some differences.
Well, I've been studying traditional Chinese medicine for most of my career. and I've just turned in the last 3 years to nationality medicine. So in some ways, there's not that much difference. But I have, by turning to nationality medicine, I've come to appreciate some of the narrowness of traditional Chinese medicine, of TCM. I'm beginning to see TCM as Han medicine. It has a national reach, a national scope, and it's very important in China from border to border. But there's a lot that it doesn't do, and a lot that cannot be understood in the terms of Chinese medicine that is being developed in these minority nationality medicines. So as far as I'm still interested in TCM, and I'm still working on it, still researching it and writing about it. But there are some real big differences between TCM and each minority nationality medicine, I think. Yeah.
I want to ask you, it means your work is more like the work of Li Shizhen. Do you know that famous Chinese pharmacist?
Oh, I would not dare. Well,
I think maybe to some kind of, well, you mean your work is not like the kind of work that Li Daoyuan, another famous person who is focused on the geography. It just describes the geography, the whole geography of China, while Li Shizhen is trying to practice and try to know how new medicine works or how traditional TCM works.
Yeah. Not my work, but we know people who we might want sometimes to compare with Li Shizhen. We have found in setting up and working with our groups of local researchers in 7 different groups, we've met people who have been going out to the villages and up in the mountains for a long, long time, talking to healers and learning a great deal. And we have great respect for these Chinese local researchers. So they're much better than we are. They know a lot more than we do.
Thank you. I'm very interested in intellectual property protection and the traditional knowledge and traditional medicine. In the Western society, we understand if the medicine is marketable, it should be very patentable. And at the same time, but it's very difficult. The traditional medicine cannot be, going to the United States market. It's very difficult because, first of all, we don't know the origin of the traditional knowledge. Who is the creator of the traditional knowledge? At the same time, we don't know the property. I don't know how to translate into into English. 产权关系, property relationships, property ownership. So if a minority nationality medicine is to go to the United States, it should be patentable and should be marketable. So I want to know your opinion. This is the first question. And the second question.
Could I answer that question first? And then we'll let you ask the second question in a second.
Okay.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Okay. Actually, the distinction between marketability and patentability is an area of great tension in the world of minority nationality medicine, because these people who have a mifang or a bianfang, they have a formula that they want to market. They have the money. They can put it in a commercial form, and they could market it, but it needs to be approved. And getting it approved is a matter of some complexity. A national patent, of course, is a lot of paperwork, and you have to prove that this is actually a unique invention of you or your family. You have to prove ownership in some sense. But also, we know one person who's trying to get a formula patented, and 3 of the ingredients are drugs that are not in the national pharmacopoeia. So he's first got to get these 3 drugs recognized before he can file for a patent, even though he can claim that this mifang is his own invention. So, yes, I think people in minority nationality medicine who would like to market certain formulas they would like to have the protection of a patent, and they would like to be able to be the marketers for the drugs that they have. But it's the legal obstacles are formidable, and it's very difficult for them to achieve this. So they would eventually like to be able to say with confidence, if it's marketable, it's patentable, but it's not so easy.
Okay, second question. You've shown a picture of photos, of just one guy with the traditional clothes, the other guys just very, very westernized, very western clothes. So at that time, I thought, some people, traditional medicine, traditional doctors wants to be science. It's very, how can I say? Traditional doctors wanted to be a scientific doctor or the development. I just want to know your opinions that the development of the traditional medicine or development of the nationality, minority nationality medicine, how they do, or very totally scientific.
Well, this is one of our issues as researchers, is that there are so many different orientations on the problem of modernization, institutionalization, and accepting regulation. So I could have shown you a lot of doctors in white coats practicing in clinics who are serious nationality doctors of each of their own nationality. I could have shown you some people practicing in, colorful minority costumes, for that matter. Though I can't remember even what slides I chose, but I think there was a preponderance of individuals working in their own homes, which is something that a lot of minority healers prefer because they're more free there. And in most areas up to now, there hasn't been any kind of a legal crackdown on this kind of unlicensed practice, especially of herbal medicine, and of various kinds of external body techniques. But there's strong motives to come to open a clinic or to move into a hospital clinic and practice there. A lot more patients can find you easily, and there's a kind of status associated with it. But then once you get into the clinic, you might find that your work is under more scrutiny, and you're forced to prepare for licensing exams, or forced to keep certain kinds of records that don't interest you. So some people sort of in the long time of the period of their lives, they might move back and forth between an institutional existence and work at home. Or a lot of people will work at home in the evening and do the work they really care about there, and go to the clinic during the day. So but everybody has to find their own way through this morass of institutionalization, which simultaneously regularizes and mainstreams nationality medicine, and at the same time drives certain kinds of practices and the people who do them out further into the wild and unregulated space, which is becoming dangerous, legally speaking. We can talk later.
Hi, thanks for your talk.
Yeah.
I was curious about this term nationality, minzu,
Yeah.
and how far we can talk about it in terms of ethnicity. To what degree is the body imagined by these alternative medical systems racialized?
Not
at all. The body is always the same.
I'm sure we could find some people who have something like that, some logic like that going, but it's not. In general, we don't even find very many people who are profoundly attached to their nationality label. What we do find a profound attachment to is locality. This attachment is expressed in the relationship with plants and drugs, and with the practice of going up into the mountains to pluck drugs.
It's dissociated with people that live in a certain location as well and might be experiencing the climate or geography in a certain way?
Yes, we've been asking that question, actually. We ask some doctors, your medicine is clearly very unique and specific. Is it only good for unique and specific local people? And most doctors say, no, that's ridiculous. You know, it's you come from Beijing, you have one of these diseases that I can deal with, I'll deal with it. You know? Yeah, but on the other hand, they do sometimes, some people have adopted a language which is well known in the world of Chinese medicine, of Tizhi, of constitution. Now, constitution could morph into a kind of racialist discourse, I think, in Chinese medicine. I've worried about that over the years in Chinese medicine. But it really, Tizhi is, a body constitution is really a result of environmental interaction, even in the classic writings in Chinese medicine about it. So sometimes a doctor will say, well, of course, Southerners have a certain Southern Tizhi, and my medicine is particularly good at dealing with this Southern Tizhi. But if you come from Beijing and you live here for 6 months, you're going to develop the same problems. You know? So it's not, you know, I don't see a racial discourse as being much of a danger in this case.
Thank you for your speech. Do you think there is such a thing as superstition in alternative medicine? Because especially in treatment of difficult and complex illness. Yeah. Because this summer I went to some minority places, and even those local people sometimes think that their medicine is superstition, and they are hesitating when going to the local doctors. So what do you think about this problem?
Well, we've talked to a lot of people who are practicing a kind of various kinds of ritual medicine, and almost every doctor, in fact, we've written a paper about this, I think almost every doctor, even in clinics in New York and Cleveland in the United States, has a certain ritual element in their work. There's always a kind of magic going on if there's any successful healing happening. But in China's South, everyone has learned to say, this is superstition, right? Some people will say, yeah, we know how to do this. Of course, it's superstition. And we have found that people have to suss us out. They have to check us out. Are we going to be rude and condescending if they admit to having an interest in superstitious practices? And I hope that they find we won't be. And a lot of people have been interested to talk with us about the ritual element of what they know. So the long-standing discourse on superstition in China has certainly given people a vocabulary to talk about what they do, or what they don't want to go near. But it doesn't seem to prevent a lot of ritual healing going on in a lot of different contexts.
Thank you for such an interesting talk. I'm curious, in some of your slides you showed of the hospitals, you showed sort of research sections, researching this national minority medicine. Yeah. And I'm curious what that word means, what the term research means in this context, whether these are kind of Western medical standards that are being imposed upon, I mean, are they taking these medicines apart in terms of their chemical components, or how are they doing research? What does that mean?
Well, a lot of natural medicines are being studied chemically. This has been going on with traditional Chinese medicine for a long time. And in nationality medicine institutes, they're not well enough funded to have large-scale bench research, laboratory research programs. But they do have some research of that kind going on. A very common kind of research is botanical, simply locating and preserving and classifying certain kinds of plants. And there's a kind of research which can be done a little less formally, a little less scientifically, which is determining the properties, the clinical, the therapeutic properties of new or little known plants. This involves actually talking to healers who have been using them, of course. There's also research on whether transplanting wild plants into domestic settings to see if they can be produced at a larger scale. There's scholarly research on trying to recover the rather fragmentary literatures of each of these groups in relation to medicine, the body, various kinds of natural forces and natural forms that are associated with this medicine. What else is there? Sometimes there are clinical trials that are organized, but those are also quite elaborate, so they usually have to collaborate with somebody in a biomedical research unit to get a clinical trial going.
Hello. With the background of issues like urbanization and intensive agriculture, you were noting about how the locally based medical traditions lay such great importance on the local flora and fauna. Has there now been any sort of dialogue with policymakers, perhaps to have a formalized system of environmental protection of where these plants come from, or has there been any kind of backwards and forwards with these two sectors?
There are some concerns in some of the areas we work in. There are many more concerns in other nationality areas, such as in Mongolia, in Xinjiang, in Tibet, Greater Tibet. In the south where we work, the forests are so lavishly, they just produce so many plants that a lot of people say they're not worried. We ask all the time. And in fact, some people have said, well, yeah, it is a worry, and I'll tell you why. It's not because of intensive agriculture. It's not because of climate change. It's because herbal medicine is getting too popular. There are too many people going up in the mountains and gathering this stuff. So I have to every time I try to go, I have to go further and farther into the mountains to get to an area that all these jerks who are tramping on my territory are plucking. So there is some concern. I think there will be a lot more in the next few years. And Dr. Guo had.
Thank you, Dr. Farquhar, for this wonderful lecture. I have one question about the faith of the patients on these doctors. Mm-hmm. One way of institutionalizing minority medicine is through education. Mm-hmm. But the experience with TCM is that after, they have these traditional Chinese medicine universities to train the doctors, the patients really have less trust in such doctors trained in this way. They would prefer 祖传三代.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if this is true with the ethnic minority medicine as well.
It may be. It's hard for me to tell. We don't talk to a whole lot of patients in our research. We're talking more with healers, but it may be that people really think that spending all day on the motorcycle, going up into the mountains, finding an isolated farmstead, and spending 3 hours with the healer, and then coming back again next week, that this healer is the one who really knows what he's doing. And when a healer says, this knowledge is yin chuanda, it's transmitted to me from the yin side by my dead ancestors who come to me in dreams, some people really want that kind of healing. That's what they think is going to be effective. And I'm not going to argue with them. These are effective healers in almost every case that we visited. So.
Oh, thank you, Butler. Thank you, Judith. And my question is about the expressing integrating or integration. And you just mentioned the 6 points about how the nationality medicine being integrated to the healthcare landscape. The first two, and I find the first 2 points is more concerned about the healthcare policy or the management of the hospitals in China. Am I right? And
I have to look. Just a second. The first 2 points, you say?
Yeah. You mean the institutional integrating, and as a part of the area of the hospital's consumer choices.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have institutionalization and consumer choice or commodification.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think these 2 points may be more concerned with the policy, healthcare policy or the hospital management, maybe.
Yeah.
And from the point of 3, 4, 5, 6, it may be more concerned with the actual their healthcare behavior, the patient's healthcare behavior.
Yeah.
So my question is, in what sense is nationality medicine is integrated to what? Maybe from the first 2 points is integrated to the whole healthcare system, or integrated to the hospital practice. But from the 3, 4, 5, 6, I think it's more like a behavior choice, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and I think is there any difference, as you mentioned the situation in America? Is there a difference in between Chinese and America in the points like healthcare preventing medical culture? I think Chinese
prevention medical culture. Yeah.
I think it's not just the Chinese, just the phenomenon happen in Chinese, right?
Well, this is a complicated question. First of all, the first 2 points about the institutional integration of nationality medicine like that of TCM, and the fact that all of these medical services exist in a market and become commodified. And you're right to say that those are a result of medical policy, because medical policy in China has been privatizing medical institutions, so they have to compete. They are in a market situation. But I think that those 2 points relate to the behavior of patients in important ways, in that the institutional leaders now have to pay attention to what patients do and what patients want in a new way. So that in a way, policy which cuts the institutions loose from direct government provision of care, that policy is ramifying out to all kinds of behaviors on the part of patients. Patients now can indulge their preferences for example, preventive care, or they can indulge their shopping for different kinds of care providers under these new policy conditions to a much greater degree. So I'm not sure that answers everything you were interested in, but the United States. The United States is a little different. The hospitals and medical institutions in the United States are definitely trying to compete for patients. There's no doubt about that. And they're in a crisis of cash flow. Everyone's worried about changes in the insurance system because hospitals can't afford to continue to provide their very expensive services under present conditions. So the market forces are the same. You'd think it would result in the same kind of shopping, the same kind of diverse and consumer behavior on the part of patients. But actually in the United States, and I don't do research in the United States, so I hate to talk about it. I could be so wrong, but it seems to me in the United States there's a tradition of loyalty to doctors that means, and a loyalty to biomedicine itself, that leads patients to be much more patient, that is, to be much more patient in working with the clinical institution where they're signed up. So that, for example, I'm signed up at the University of Chicago clinics, and my insurance first of all, my insurance won't pay for services anywhere but there. But, and I keep thinking I should change my insurance. I should be able to go anywhere in the city to get care. But I keep thinking, no, these guys have been taking care of me for a long time. I should just stick with the program and be loyal because they're the doctor. They know, right? So there's this kind of tradition of trust in doctors just because they're doctors in the United States, which I've never perceived that going on here. Oh.
I was just going to do one more question, and then I had another question of my own.
Okay.
And we're going to wrap it up. So the last question of the audience, and I've got one of my own.
Well, thanks for your wonderful speech. I don't know whether my question is appropriate here. Just like her question, there are some interactions between the institution and the doctor-patient relationship, and I'm majoring in sociology. So I want to know the relationship between the different aspects you mentioned in your speech, and is there some important interactions between like the institution and the consumer choice, the things like that in the interactions between the different aspects and the different reasons?
I could either spend the next hour answering that question, or I could say that I think that there's that the interactions are fairly easy to imagine, because there's a general process of actually we've just written a paper calling it rationalization, in which knowledge is rationalized. It's carefully studied and put together and made consistent and put into textbooks. Training is thus rationalized, so that and there are training with classes and tests. Licensing is rationalized, controlling who can be a legal practitioner. Institutions are rationalized, setting up the case record systems, setting up the clinical rounds, setting up the human resources departments who hire the doctors, the nurses, the administrators, the aides, the drivers, et cetera, et cetera. There's all kinds of rationalization going on, which only some of which you might call institutionalization, right? But it ramifies out to all kinds of knowledge aspects of what's going on. And as you say, it affects the doctor-patient relationship, which in my opinion is extremely multiple. There are many kinds of doctor-patient relationships, and it's not just the doctor that we relate to when we go to the doctor anyway. We relate to the whole institution. So to pay too much attention to the doctor-patient relationship is to forget a lot of important things that go on in institutions. So yes, there are lots and lots of relationships. There's a general process. And it's all the same actors in all these processes, right? So, of course it's related. There's an integration at the level of the actor.
I'm sure Judy will stick around to chat for a while after this. But I just wanted to take the last question to ask you about a far different topic, I guess, but which is the University of Chicago has recently opened the Neubauer Collegium, and you've taken an active role in that. I just wondered if you could tell us a little bit about what the Collegium is going to do and what you're specifically doing in it.
The Neubauer Collegium is a sort of a foundation. We were just referring to it as a foundation in our little group, which was brought here by them, which is designed to increase collaborative and exchange scholarship activities at the University of Chicago. Another faculty member at the University of Chicago, Han Sosi, and I have gathered a group of 4 stellar Chinese scholars, one of them teaching in Canada, the other 3 teaching here in China, and asked them to join us for 1 month each year for the next 3 years in Chicago to read together, to talk together, to teach each other, and to collaborate in writing together. Our topic is the question of history in China, how history is written, how history is studied, what history contributes to notions of the nation, and how language is, and the history of language itself relates to both the nationalist and national concerns and to the nature of history. We think we're going to find a lot of differences in China, and we look forward to comparing Chinese historiography with world historiography.
This group set a record for quality of questions tonight. So we have some upcoming events. Even next Monday, there's another one at Shaughnessy on the birth of China, the University of Chicago, and the archaeological discovery of ancient China, and then a couple more in October. So you can sign up for those at uchicago.cn. Please come back soon.